Welcome, everybody. I would just like to say a special welcome to our guest, our featured guest, who is also here, who will be joining in a minute. But before we get into it, I would love to introduce myself. My name is Brian Royce. I am based in Jamaica with the Repair Campaign, and we are commemorating this week as a week of repair in honor of the UN International Days, including March 21st, which was on Friday, which was the International Day of Elimination of Racism. And tomorrow, which is March 25th, is the UN International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery and the slave trade. That's actually what we're going to be talking about today with our special guest who's about to join us. She is the chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Committee, Professor Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean.
Hello, hi Niambi.
Hi,
You're here.
Brian.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am good. I'm glad we finally are getting able to do this.
Me too. You have no idea how excited I am to talk to you. As you can see here in the comments, I was just giving a little introduction there. But continue to drop your flags, guys, from wherever you're from. I see Jamaica, I see Grenada,
All right.
UK and Jamaica, Trinidad, US Bayesian parents. Welcome everybody. We are stoked to connect to you. Irie, based in London at the moment. Yes, Master Herbalist, welcome. As you can see, this is going to be a very interactive conversation in honor of, like I was saying before, March 25th, which is tomorrow, the UN International Day of Remembrance for, as they phrase it, for the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Interestingly enough, Professor, I'm just going to call you Niambi for today, but for everybody else in the audience, it's Professor Professor Niambi. Before I ask you to introduce yourself, I just wanted to let folks know that we thought it was interesting that the language that they use to commemorate this day of March 25th, you know, the victims, circle victims of slavery, circle slavery, because which slavery are we talking about? And the transatlantic slave trade. Again, we'll come back to the language there. The whole premise of the conversation we're having today is reframing the language that we use to talk about slavery in the Caribbean. You grew up, you hear everybody talk about slavery this and slavery that, but I'm not a slave. We want to, in this conversation, hear from Niambi, who is an expert in all of this, as a professor herself, in deconstructing and reframing how language influences the way that we perceive the movement, we perceive others and perceive ourselves, and what we can do to reframe this language and have a more impactful reparations movement, essentially. So before I turn over to you, Niambi, I would just like to make note to everyone in the audience as well that this is one conversation in a series of conversations taking place. We have two more conversations taking place tomorrow at 12 o'clock Jamaica time, 1 o'clock if you're in the Bahamas, as well as at 6 p.m. Jamaica time tomorrow. And those will be with the CEO of the Black Curriculum, based in the UK, that's Lavinia Stennett, an amazing individual talking about the importance of Black history education. And then in the evening tomorrow, we'll be talking with Fiona Compton from Know Your Caribbean, who is an amazing cultural ambassador, content creator, reparations advocate from St. Lucia, on how can you practically honor your ancestors in this day and age. So stay tuned for those, and we invite you to sign in solidarity with the calls for reparations. If you leave a comment down below with the word repair, our system will automatically direct message you a link to where you can sign in solidarity. So just drop repair in the comments and let us know if you get the link. It's also in our bio at Repair Campaign. So as we get into things, again, welcome to anybody who recently joined. This is a conversation on reframing the language we use to talk about slavery. We have a special guest here. Niambi, I would love if you could introduce yourself to the lovely people in the audience.
Sure. So good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dr. Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean, I am an Afrocentric community psychologist, an associate professor at the University of the Bahamas, and I am also the chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Committee. Yeah.
Fantastic. How did you get involved in this work? What's your origin story?
You know what? My origin story, I think, is really interesting because I've been a part of the Bahamas Reparations Committee since it was formed in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time. Um, and actually, I was named to the committee in 2013. I just one day was at work and I got a letter from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs saying, "You've been named to be a part of this committee." And I was like,
Wow.
okay, you know, let's do it. And so, to be honest with you, I feel kind of like in this day where we are remembering our ancestors, that my ancestors kind of guided me along the path because I was not like into reparations at the time. I honestly didn't know that much about it, besides the fact that there was a reparations movement and I had Rasta friends, so they would talk they
Mm-hmm.
would talk about it, um but that was really it. There was nothing that I would say that I mean, I was involved in a lot of community organizations and whatnot, but nothing to really stand out and say, oh, reparations. So I think I just kind of was guided into reparations. And once I joined, like, that was it. And I just really see it as a tool and avenue in which my people can be free. So I'm all on board now.
I remember seeing your interview recently on the podcast where you said that exact thing. I want my people to be free. And I love that so much because honestly, that is really the why behind all of this. You made that very clear in your interview. But I relate to that, right? It's this desire where we want better for our people, right? And that's
Absolutely.
that's why we're here having this conversation on reframing the language around chattel slavery and
Hmm.
repair. So that's an awesome start. You were literally handpicked for
Yeah.
this destiny, this glorious destiny, which you are helping to usher in
Yeah.
this new age. It's a really important work you're doing and a really pivotal moment for reparations right now. So thank you,
Thank you.
just off the bat. So again, greetings to everybody who just joined. We're talking about reframing the language around chattel slavery with Professor Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean from the Bahamas Reparations Committee. So Niambi, I would love to talk. Let's just jump straight into this commemorative day tomorrow,
Hmm.
March 25th on Tuesday. Um, I was doing some research and remembered that this date was actually instated in 2007 by the United Nations, to, I'm sure it's part of their global philanthropic efforts to commemorate these groundbreaking, that's not the right word, um, these big events in history, monumentous events in history, which have shaped the present day. And so in
Hmm.
2007, that's when they instated this day. And it feels to me like it's kind of been flying under the radar. When I ask people, did you know about this day? Everyone says no. So
Hmm.
really quickly, for everyone in the comment section, just drop a Y or an N. Did you know about this March 25th day before, or is this the first time you're hearing about this? I'm just curious to see if this is something that's on your radar.
Hmm.
But in light of this day, which is again called by the UN the International Day of Remembrance for the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Niambi, what are your thoughts on how that, just even the title, is phrased from the get-go? Do you have any ideas, as I'm seeing an influx of no's, nobody knew about this day?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think that the wording is interesting, right? Even if we just start with victims of chattel slavery.
Mm,
Um, so again, I'm a psychologist. A lot of our colleagues in the reparations movement come from a historical background, a history background. So my, I think, perspective on things is sometimes a little bit different. But if we start with the word of victim, right? I don't perceive my ancestors as being victims. I see them as being victors, right? Because the fact that I exist means
Mm,
they were victorious in surviving,
yeah.
So that word itself. And then when we say the victims, who exactly would those people be? Would they be the people that died in the Middle Passage? Would they be the people that died on the plantations? Would they be the people that survived the transatlantic slave trade? Would they be me? Am I a victim?
Mm,
Right? Because how has that legacy impacted the countries and the spaces where I live and where I exist, right? So who exactly would the victim be, and where are we starting and where are we stopping?
that's a great point.
You know?
Fantastic point. To
Yeah.
what extent are those who maybe, I mean, I certainly do believe that the word victim would apply to, the 20% of the 12 million enslaved Africans that were forcibly trafficked and who died during the Middle Passage. 20% of 12 million. Can we even conceive of how many individual human stories that is? That's more than the size of some countries.
Absolutely. I mean, the population in the Bahamas is only 500, not even yet really
Yeah.
500,000, right? So we're not even at 1 million people yet. But that brings up one of the points that our chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, Sir Hilary Beckles, makes a lot when he says that genocide, that we don't really connect the genocide
That's
of the
right.
transatlantic chattel, and even that, right, transatlantic. Some people say transatlantic chattel slavery, but Dr. Vereen Shepherd talks about the trafficking of Africans,
That's right.
right? If we're using the words that are in vogue today, that we knew that there was no trade, right? These people were kidnapped and trapped.
Exactly.
Um, but that there was a genocide that was happening in this period. When you look at the number of people that were trafficked to Barbados versus the population of what Barbados is now, that even their current day populations is less than the number of Africans that were trafficked to that island.
Yeah.
And the same thing in Jamaica. So what happens to all of these victims?
Genocide, the scale of which the world has never seen.
Yeah. And we're not framing it in that way, right? How interesting would it be if it was the UN Day of the remembrance of the genocide of trafficked Africans?
I mean, can you see the UN going there?
I don't know. I don't know.
But call it what it is.
My fellow,
That's exactly what it is.
yeah, yeah, but that would frame exactly who we're talking about. We're talking about the people who did die in the Middle Passage,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about the people who did die in on the plantations. So it would be a more accurate language to use, and also more specific in allowing us to see, okay, who exactly are we focusing on
Yeah.
this.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, is it problematic in referring to those who survived and resisted as victims? Is there a problem inherent in the language?
I think that's something for us to really consider, right? Because I think that one of the things that um, causes us to kind of separate from our legacy of enslavement, or to say, well, you know, I wasn't a slave, my great 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 right, Grammy was a slave, and we know it wasn't that many
It wasn't
greats.
that many grades. I was just gonna point out, yeah,
Many
wasn't
greats,
that long ago.
right? But we try, you know, when you're in primary school, try to push it away, make it
Yeah,
far away from you. And I think that one of the reasons why that happens is because the language of enslavement removes the agency of the people who were victors of that trafficking,
there it is.
right? And one thing that we know about all all people, right? But specifically African people, is that they are people of agency,
That's right.
of great agency. And so you have to invoke that agency into every area of their lives, into every aspect of our
That's
history.
right.
If there was agency, there would be no Bahamas, there would be no Jamaica, right? Because the work that we put in to survive, when clearly it was less expensive to kill you and get another one,
That
right?
fact
Like, we can't
alone.
forget that. We cannot forget that. It was cheaper to get another you than to keep you alive.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to survive that and come, not just survive that, Ryan, but to survive that and love, to survive that and create stew peas,
Mm.
to survive that and create junkanoo,
Yeah,
to survive that and speak patois, your own language,
yeah,
right? That's an agency.
yeah.
And so our language needs to begin to invoke this agency, not just in the moments where we talk about, you know, oh, Junkanoo is amazing, but in the moments where we talk about the enslavement as well.
Wow. That was so perfectly articulated, Niambi. What I'm hearing you say is that the language around victims strips our ancestors of the agency that they used to not only survive, but to create and to thrive in, despite these horrific conditions, and to create life amidst that. And that agency is important to be reflected in the language we use to commemorate that.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
so spot on. And the,
Yeah.
and there needs to be also, I believe, a sense of, as you say, the idea of victimhood. There's a resistance in identifying with one's ancestors if perceived as victims. Nobody wants to see themselves as a helpless victim, right? And I think there's an issue of identity, that language is a very potent tool in shaping identity. And there's in constructing our identity as Caribbean people. Um, the importance of language really comes through here, because we need to go beyond this idea that our ancestors were victims, because it removes not just the agency, but the grandeur of civilization and the legacy and the rich history that came before the transatlantic
That,
trafficking. If am I right?
yes,
Because a lot of
absolutely.
people that I talk to believe that our history in the Caribbean began on a slave ship.
Mm.
And that in itself is problematic, no?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All of it. Um, you know, and I think you even see it when we talk about language, to take it like to the social media space.
Mm,
I don't know how popular it is still now, but I know that there was like some point where you would see people posting about things, maybe injustices that had happened to Black people, right? And the post would be like hashtag I'm not my ancestors,
I
right?
didn't see that.
Seen that? Have you seen? It was
I haven't seen that. Has anyone in the comments seen that? Put a yes or a no quickly,
yeah,
please.
kind of like this. Oh, you might have been able to do that back in the day, or I'm, you know, back in the day they might have sat at a lunch counter and let people spit on them, but I'm not my ancestors,
Okay,
right? Like, it's been me,
okay.
right? Idea of, oh, well, I wouldn't have been trafficked, or they wouldn't have caught me, or,
Okay.
right? And it's kind of, it, I understand, as problematic as it
Mm.
is, I understand that it comes from, okay, somebody is saying they see it all the
Yeah.
time. Let's see. Right? That I think that it comes from that space of not saying I am not my ancestors, but I am trying to separate. I'm not a victim.
Yeah.
Right? I'm separating myself from people who, from the stories that I heard, didn't have any agency.
Yeah.
You know, so I know that I didn't learn about Maroons until I was, you know, I didn't know that there was a legacy of people throughout the diaspora who resisted and actively were able to remove themselves,
Yeah.
right? To rebel. I didn't
Yeah.
know. So that's part of it as well.
That's a huge part of the importance of language in reframing this victim mentality with that of the resistance, which I think you rightly point out here. I'm loving that we're going in this direction, because as a part of this week of repair that we've been conducting, which will extend to the end of the week, is the importance of centering stories of resistance, which I think, to tie into your previous point on agency, is the whole point, to emphasize that there was agency at each step of the way, and that agency opposed this system of chattel slavery from the very beginning. So there was at no point where the enslaved Africans okay with this. There's this often spoken about idea, which we posted a video about recently that went viral, that Africans sold other Africans, which is a common thing that you hear all the time.
Absolutely.
And what I find difficult in that conversation is, again, this idea that it erases the agency and the resistance, and the fact that when let's say some of the African slave traders who were themselves kidnapped and trafficked into slavery, for example, Chief Tachi, which I know Stephen Golding of
Right.
the UNI talks about all the time, when he got over to Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
he was like, no, this is nothing like the systems of penal slavery that were practiced in Africa, and then turned around and led one of the greatest revolts of history, which inspired the Haitian Revolution. And I think that is so important to center these stories of resistance in this whole conversation for that reason. What's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really important too. And I think the things that's missing from this day of remembrance, right? Is that we're not, the title victims of chattel slavery doesn't, you're not thinking of Nanny of the Maroons when you say that,
Yeah.
right? You're not thinking of Pompeii and the Bahamas
Yeah.
when you hear that. You're not thinking of, the quilombos in Brazil when you hear you're only thinking of the people that died. And if we're going to remember, let's remember everybody.
Yeah. How can we remember them in their freedom, in their resistance, in their power, which I think is a huge important part in this conversation that's missing from the language.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to ask you another question. To what extent does, you like how I use my university language here? I feel like I'm in one of my classes again. I'm living for this conversation, by the way. And welcome to everyone who just joined. Please comment repair, and we'll send you the link to sign in solidarity as we commemorate tomorrow as the day of remembrance for our ancestors who overcame. Let's call it that.
Let's do that.
I want to ask you another question now. To what extent does the language that we use perpetuate further mental slavery in, for example, the idea of even the word the slave trade, this idea that human beings can be owned and traded, versus the language of, or even looking at the language of slave owners versus the language of enslavers. Is there, as we talk about agency, is there a necessary agency that we should ascribe to those who forced this system of enslavement on our ancestors in the first place? That tension between enslavers versus slave owners. Who is responsible in our minds when we hear slave owners versus enslavers? How does that connect to that idea of agency? And does that further perpetuate some sorts of mental slavery in this day and age? Sorry, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we were having this conversation, I think that it's clear when we're saying that, our words are, can you hear that? Is that a
It's
problem?
okay.
No?
I'm sure it will stop soon.
Okay.
We'll press
I'm
along.
sorry about that. But I think that, the language, as we were saying, is important, and the language is powerful because words are things. The words that we use create the realities that we find ourselves in. And our words can take us to the past, but they can also propel us to the future, right? So even if we're talking using words that are referencing things in the past, what kind of past are we creating with just the words that we are using? And so when you say a a slave owner versus um uh,
An enslaver.
or even worse, right, master, the
Oh yeah, massa.
right? I can't, like, I twitch every time I hear like
Cringe.
master. I can't, but it's such a regular part of the language that is used, and the way that we talk about slavery and enslavement, and so that it becomes the norm. And I think that it does lead to, or not necessarily, and maybe not lead to, but I think that it keeps in place the mental frameworks that we have around who had power and who didn't.
Yeah.
Right, the way that the power was distributed, or what the power even means, and then even still, like, how that power works in our communities, in our societies today. I think one of the things too, right, that happens a lot of times when we talk about days like this, like remembrance of the victims of chattel slavery, that it makes it seem like this is something only for the victims,
Yeah.
right? But what happens to the mental space of those who were the enslavers? Right? What kind of psychology did they pass down?
Yeah.
Right? Because you have to be in a certain mindset to strip the humanity from someone and perceive them as no longer human. So, what do you have to do, right? As a human being, what do you have to do to remove the humanity from someone? And then how do you pass on that type of thinking to your progeny? And then
Yeah.
how does your progeny get to the day of the remembrance of the victims of chattel slavery? And then what does that mean?
And to take that a step further, to then deny the right to repair for said victims. How can there be
Exactly.
a day of remembrance for the victims, yet still former colonizing countries with links to the United Nations continue to deny any sort of involvement and any sort of right to repair? I think there's some cognitive dissonance there, that this day, I think we should commemorate this every year in a big way to really tease apart that dissonance and say, okay, we're commemorating the victims, then how does that connect to the present day calls for repair?
How does that connect to holding the people accountable,
Accountable.
right? For the fact that they're
Yeah, yeah. I think I lost your audio there. I can't hear you right now. Yeah, there you go.
and like we were saying earlier, if when you think about days like Holocaust Remembrance Day,
Yeah.
that causes you to say, well, who caused there to be a
Mm.
Holocaust?
Yeah. That's an
Right?
excellent point. Even the language in the day puts the onus of responsibility on those who perpetrated that crime against
Exactly.
humanity. And where is that in the Day of Remembrance for the victims? Is there a way that it needs to be reframed to in such a way that reminds the enslavers, those who were the ones perpetrating this crime against humanity, that there's a responsibility to make amends for the crimes committed by their ancestors.
Exactly. And
Wow.
so I think it wouldn't be as much of an issue if, one, we had reparations.
Right.
Then you could have a day to remember the victims if we had reparations, or if there was a day that had the language that held the people accountable who are responsible, right? But we don't. We don't have either of those things. So we're just starting from a day of remembering victims. And so it leaves a lot of the story left, not really placed on the table. And it's like, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about all of it. Well, let's really get to the truth of what it is that we are remembering here. And we're not just remembering the people that were forced into, that were trafficked, but we have to keep in mind all of the players.
That's right. This was not just a one-sided project by any means. Multi-sided. It wasn't even just a two-sided project. I think before we even go into the conversation of repair, the last thing I wanted to circle back to, even briefly, was the importance of the word chattel slavery versus slavery. And is there, what would you like to see happen in terms of how people relate to this word chattel slavery? And can you help us, those of us who are listening, unpack what chattel slavery even means, different from slavery, which we hear all the time?
Sure, because that, I think, is a really important point, and one that, when you start to have conversations about reparations in public spaces, people were like to bring up all the time. Like, oh, well, Africans weren't the only people to be enslaved. The Irish were slaves, right? The Greeks were slaves. The Romans were slaves. Everybody in centuries were slaves. But were they considered chattel, right? Was their slavery one in which they were a slave by the status of their mother? Meaning that if your mummy was a slave, you are automatically a slave.
By default.
Right? Yeah, by default. So you can't fight for your enslaver and free yourself, right? That there is no system in which your slave status is alleviated because your humanity has been removed. You're not a human, you are property. Right?
Yeah.
Right? That's why when I lose you, I can put you up on my insurance or something, right? I can insure you and get money back because you're property.
That's that meaning of the word chattel, right?
Exactly. And so that's what we have to keep in mind when we're talking about this system. Hold on.
No problem at all. And everyone who's just joined the conversation, welcome. We're in conversation with Professor Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean, the chair of the Bahamas Reparations Committee, talking about the language we use to refer to chattel slavery and repair as part of our week of repair, where we're asking you to help us honor our ancestors by signing in solidarity with the reparations movement. Comment repair in the chat, and our system will automatically send you the link to sign. It's also in the link in our bio, so if you hit up top repair campaign, please consider supporting the reparations movement in this way. But you're absolutely spot on that the whole idea of chattel slavery involving the complete and utter dehumanization of an individual past the point of any sort of possible redemption in the future, where they were treated as units of capital, units of productive labor to be exploited, and that being completely different from any other system of slavery the world has ever seen.
Exactly.
We recently had an excellent interview with Professor Patrick Scanlon, who is a renowned historian on this topic, and produced an article called The Unique Brutality of Chattel Slavery, which, if you're interested, you can comment down there and I'll send it to you afterwards. Or it's on our website, repaircampaign.org. But yeah, I think even something as simple as adding the word chattel slavery to the UN Day would go a long way. It's not there. It's just the victims of slavery.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But it does say transatlantic, I think, right?
It does say transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
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 Yes. So now to connect the dots between the historical between the history that we've been talking around here and the present day movement for repair. We, in our conversation before this, we're talking about what does repair even mean? We hear the words in the conversation reparations, we hear reparatory justice, we hear the word repair, reparative, and all of these words I think are interesting in that they stem from, you know, the Latin root reparare, which means repair, and which means to repair, sorry, and to restore. Now I think there's some interesting language in that, to restore, to repair, but I'd love to hear your views on, again, how language around repair shapes the present day movement that we're in.
I think when we talk about the word repair, that one of the things that is not always made immediately apparent is that repair and reparations really is talking about repair to the point as if the damage had never occurred.
Yep, I see what you mean.
Right? Repair to the point as if the damage had never occurred. Now, ain't no way that could happen.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Right? That's not going to be able to happen. So, what are we really trying to repair? Right? Where are we really trying to get to? And so I think that this is one of the beautiful things about the CARICOM Reparations Commission's 10-point plan, right? Is that it outlines some very specific areas of repair in the Caribbean that need to be addressed. But I think that one of the things that we're also trying to incorporate is what I think the Center for Reparations Research has been doing beautifully in the last few months, is talking about this cultural reparations, right? A cultural restoration.
Yes.
Right? And what Bob Marley has, said, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery.
Yes.
So as we are repairing, and that cultural restoration is something, that's work that we have to do.
Yes. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's repair that comes from an internal place. Right? Now, that's not to say that internal work wouldn't happen a lot faster with some money.
Exactly where we're going with this. Yes.
With school systems that are effective, with healthcare systems that actually focus on the healing and the wellness of people, right? With psychological rehabilitation in place, with debt cancellation, so we can use the little monies that we do have in our small countries to work on us, right?
Exactly.
Paying out to you all for problems that we didn't even create in the first place.
There it is.
So it's like, just give us what we were due from your underdevelopment, right? Because you can't restore us to where we would have been. You can't do that. So just give us where we would be, right? Helped with from the underdevelopment perspective, and then we will have the agency to do the work on us.
I'm so glad you said that word agency again, because it was on the tip of my tongue to circle back to your previous comments, because you're so right that this cultural repair that you speak of is within our control, and there is an element of self-repair that needs to take place. And I think it is a huge testament to the spirit of our ancestors who lives on through us, that despite these odds, we have been able to come so far, right? And that's a testament to the agency that we've inherited from them, that despite the fact that when the UK left Jamaica and that the Unjust Emancipation Act was signed, that there were more, I recently learned this fact this weekend, there were only 3 schools built in Jamaica at the time, but there were 31 prisons built at the time. And it's a testament to the fact that despite the odds, Jamaica and the Caribbean has done a fantastic job to develop to the point where we are, given due to the agency that we've inherited. But to your point, the call for repair goes beyond what we are able to do for ourselves, in that we've done a great job and need to continue this work of self-repair, but does call for the systematic, what's the right word I'm looking for here? Development or injection of compensation for the crimes against humanity that were committed before, so that the Caribbean countries can advance to a state where it might not be comparable to where we would have been had this not taken place,
Right.
but at least to a standard where we can consider the things that we see as privileges as basic human rights. For example, access to education or healthcare, which in the Caribbean, it's like if you can only access these things if you're sort of well off. But then what proportion of society is not able to access basic human necessities because of the way that the legacies have systematically disadvantaged huge swaths of our society?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such an important conversation, because so many times, right? In my classes, and I don't know if you experience this in Jamaica as well, but in the Bahamas, it's not an easy time. A lot of people are struggling. And in that struggle, I find that we pathologize ourselves so much, right? Like well, Bahamians can't do this, and Bahamians that, and
It's the
and it's like,
same in Jamaica.
wait a minute, right? Like I was telling my students the other day, my parents are the first generation of Bahamians to have access to secondary education, to free secondary education.
What?
My right?
Wow.
And no, that ain't no true. Everybody could have gone. No, everybody couldn't go to school.
Yeah.
Everybody couldn't go. My grandmother had a 3rd grade education because she had to leave school to go work. My maternal grandmother, my paternal grandmother, I remember one time I came back from grad school and she was asking me, and both are now passed, God rest their souls. But she was asking me how grad school was, and I was like, oh, it's so hard and it's so much work and it's so, and she just looked at me and she said, I always wished I could go to school. That changed everything for me. That changed everything for me. As she said that, and as she gave you, the hand where your Grammy or the older people is take your hand and then slip a little something in it, so that you could go back to school, something, And she said, I always wished I could go to school. These people didn't have access to education. This is my grandmother. I'm not talking about a great, right? This is so when we say, oh, we not this, so we should be doing that, and we like to compare ourselves to the United States, how long they had access to secondary education?
Exactly.
Right? So it's so much work that we are trying to catch up on.
Yes.
because of this legacy, because of the underdevelopment, because of colonization, don't really take that into account when assessing where we are.
Yeah. And we need to do a better job in honoring our ancestors, in not being self-deprecating about ourselves as, oh, Jamaican people this and Bahamian people that, realizing that we're starting at a systematic disadvantage, which was intentional, which was intentionally created. There's a famous quote, I need to look up who actually said it, but it's, not a single nailhead is to be made in the colonies. And that stuck out to me because it just underlines the intentional approach that former colonizing countries took to the development of the Caribbean, which is to say the development is ours and they're not meant to have anything.
Absolutely.
And I think part of that repair includes bridging that gap, that technological gap as well, especially in the modern age right now.
Absolutely, right? That's one of our 10 points
Yep.
in the CARICOM 10-point plan, right? And I mean, I think you can look across the Caribbean region and see things like in the Bahamas, we have salt. The Morton Salt Company is located on the island of Inagua. They basically run the entire island. When you go to Inagua, you will see mountains, literally mountains
of salt,
right? But then where do we get salt from? In the food store, buying Morton's, right? So and why? Because we don't own the means of production. We own the resources, but we don't own the means of production, right? We cannot produce these things so that they can go to market. And so this is the repair that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? This is the repair that we're talking about. These are the legacies when we're talking about remembering, that we could remember, hey, well, my Grammy, but she knew how to make salt. Right? So how do we remember the agency of our ancestors and use that in ways where we can also repair ourselves?
Yeah. Because their spirit of agency and resistance, I think agency is the word that I'm taking from this conversation, lives on in our very DNA. And I think that's such a powerful thing to remember.
Absolutely.
Niambi, I want to ask you, amidst this conversation on agency, on self-repair, on healing, which is something that we mentioned very briefly, how would you like to see this remembrance of our ancestors play out in a practical way? And what does it mean to you to honor our ancestors in seeking repair and healing as we remember them? What does that mean to you? And you can take a personal angle to this if you want. I think that's probably better. Like, we want to, like, get to know you as a person as well.
Yeah. I think there are so many different ways or things that come to mind. The first year, because when was this started?
2007.
2000. Oh, yeah, I didn't know about it way back then.
No,
So, I think the first year that I became aware of it was 2023. And that happened to be the year, and it was not 2023, it's 2022, but whatever year that Prince William and Kate came and did their tour.
That's when you became aware of it.
Because that was the year that the Bahamas National Reparations Committee wrote a letter that kind of went viral about their visit. And their visit happened to fall on March 25th.
Okay.
So we were like, in no way. Like, y'all come, but be aware of the day
Read the
that you are
room.
coming, right? Everything that is happening on this day. So for me, that's one of the things that I always remember about that day, March 25th. And also that it's one of the days to maybe on a larger level to do something that I think I try to do on a personal level quite frequently, and that's simply to just acknowledge, right, who my ancestors are.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about the victims, remember in the beginning of the conversation was like, well, where does that victim
Stop.
end? Right? So for me, my Grammys who couldn't go to school because there was no school for them to go to, they were victims, right? Because that's the legacy of what that was, that you don't need to know anything because you're not human. So even if the system stops, why would your children need to know anything, right? Why would we need to invest in any of these spaces? So I think that for me, it's remembering the ancestors, not just who might have been the more immediate victors, right, of enslavement, but those who survived the legacies to create spaces that were a little bit better than the ones that they lived in.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. Because you're right.
Yeah.
And it has been an incremental process, generation after generation, of trying to do a little bit more for the next generation. I often think about how um, our ancestors would be thinking about us, and how their
Absolutely.
efforts throughout their lives were to create a world, or to create a context where their children would be better off than them. And I think that there's an element of responsibility, that I feel, as we remember them in that regard, to pursue justice and repair and healing and reconnection and reparative and reparation for the conditions that led them to be in such a space where they had to, you know, fight tooth and nail and try their very best just so that we could have a chance that they didn't.
And freedom.
Freedom.
And freedom, right? So we remember them by being free ourselves, right? Being free in the language that we use to talk about ourselves, being free in the way that we live our Caribbean lives,
Yeah.
right? In the way that we interact with our Caribbean brothers and sisters. That freedom is not just a goal, it's a responsibility for the ancestors who had to use their imagination to even conceive of what freedom could be.
Yeah. Yes. Wow, that's so powerful. The way that you said that our language influences freedom. Can you say a little bit more about that? I'm curious as to what you meant by how we can embody freedom in our language. I have some thoughts, but I would love to hear what you have in
Yeah,
mind.
no. So, I mean, I think just from our whole conversation, right, where we were talking about that we're not the victims of chattel slavery, we're the victors of trafficked Africans, right?
The new name
That
of the
we're
day
not.
right there.
Exactly. Right? All of these things that we're not, that our behaviors or that the challenges that we are experiencing are not because we have a particular pathology as Bahamians or a particular pathology as Jamaicans, right? But because we're in circumstances that are challenging.
Yeah.
Right? And Bahamians aren't bad people, but all Bahamians aren't good people. Nobody
Yeah.
is all good. Nobody is all bad. Nobody is all honest. Nobody is all lying, teeth
Yeah.
in. So we can use our language to engage our agency
Yeah.
and pursue our freedom.
And use language to create realities that might not yet have been created.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm very big on recently speaking. You know, you grew up in church and you hear like speak things into existence, right? You've
Yes.
heard that before. I think there is
Yes.
such power in the way that language can be used to shape reality. And I think as we pursue this movement for reparation, um, the question on my mind is how can we use language, for example, the word solidarity itself, among others, right? But um, including repair, including healing, to create a future where Caribbean people can thrive in a space where we move from this self-pathologizing language, which you touched on before, into a language scheme that uplifts and empowers, that actually reminds us of the rich legacies that we come from, of the brilliance and the triumph that is built into our history, the freedom that is built into, well, that was hard earned, I shouldn't say built into our history at all. And using intentional language around the way that we see ourselves as Caribbean people. Yeah, and yeah, I don't know if there's a clear question in there, but as I see folks in the audience, you know, joining, I just want to again take a pause and welcome everybody to the conversation with Professor Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean from the Bahamas National Reparations Committee, as part of a week of repair where we're having conversations around how we can honor our ancestors, and in particular honor them by signing and standing in solidarity with the calls for reparations. Are there questions? You know, I'm seeing comments in the chat here, but if there are questions from those who are listening, or thoughts, we really want to engage with you guys as well. So please feel free to drop a comment or write a question while you have the expertise of Niambi in front of you. But as we wrap up, one of my last questions here is, Niambi, how would you like to see people take action or be in solidarity around the reparations movement? What is your hope for the future as it relates to reparations? Is sort of what I'm asking. As you know, others in the comments leave any questions.
Well, definitely sign the petition, right? I mean, that's
Right.
where we could start right there. Sign the petition. I've been so encouraged and um, enlightened, enthused by these debates
Yeah.
that the Repair and the Center for Reparation Studies and a host of others have helped to organize with the young people in the reparations debates that are happening. I mean, I've just been so excited by the engagement of these people, of these young people, and their passion and the information that they have. You know, that they're coming with is, it's been really exciting.
It's inspiring.
So I'm, you know, I think that is where we have to go, just really engaging young people to move and keep progressing this movement forward. You know, people becoming engaged with your local reparations committees. You know, I think there were some people on here who are, maybe you're in the UK or you're in the US, but you're of Jamaican heritage. I would encourage you to connect to the reparations committees of your, you know, country of origin, and just find out what they're doing and see how there are ways that you can support the work that they're doing on the
It's a
ground in
great one.
those countries. um you know, so just staying connected. Reparations is the theme of the African Union this year, right? So this reparations movement is not going anywhere, right?
Except forward, yeah.
Except forward, as Sir Hilary Beckles state, it is the civil rights movement
Of
of
the
this
21st
century,
century.
right? So it's like, let's all get on board and understand, because as I keep saying, it's not if reparations are coming, It's when,
Thank you.
right? It's when they're coming. So when they're come, let's be
Yeah,
ready. Let's know exactly what it is so that people don't say, oh, well, here are your reparations, take it now, or leave it. you
and then it
know
misses us. Yeah,
exactly. Let's be ready. So
absolutely.
just find out, and if you are in the know, bring some young people along with you to get them in the know as well.
Absolutely. That's going to be critical, especially for the folks that just joined here. We're asking, what do we want to see in the future of reparations? And you are spot on in that engaging the young people is going to be key. I'm a big believer in the each one teach one um, catchphrase, whatever the word I'm looking for is,
Yeah.
where if everyone in the audience in the comment section here today even goes back to their family this evening and says, hey, I was on an Instagram live today where they were talking about reparations. You heard of reparations before? Did you know tomorrow is the day of remembrance of our ancestors?
Hmm.
And have that ripple effect sort of spread between the kids who are in the debate competition when they're doing their homework and research and talking to their grannies about what's going on in school. The conversation needs to extend outwards from these spaces, even on social media, which is a powerful tool,
Hmm.
into the homes, into the communities, into the schools. So that's certainly something that we are working actively towards and are relying on everybody who has participated in this conversation here to help extend this conversation and to sign in solidarity. If you comment repair, our system will automatically send you the link to sign in solidarity, which you can also find in our bio. Because wouldn't it be powerful if we could say 2025, which is the, as you said, the year of reparations from the African Union. It's also the 200th bicentenary anniversary of when the debt was levied on Haiti. The
Hmm.
ransom was levied on Haiti for their emancipation and freedom, right? And Haiti is a central piece in this entire conversation. We cannot talk about repair without an honest conversation about Haiti.
If there
I say all of
are
this to
no
say
reparations for Haiti, there are no
there
reparations.
are that's exactly it. And so
Period.
as we approach the rest of 2025, I think it's going to be critical for everyone who has participated in this in some way to really take action. Right now, it's really all about action, and one way you can do that is by signing in solidarity and having these conversations outside of these spaces. As we wrap up, I'm seeing Niambi. I don't know if you can address this question from Mikey in the comments. How do we work to take back the anthropology field instead of outsiders coming to study us?
Mm.
Instead coming to study, having us capture and preserve our culture on film in particular. That could be an interesting area of repair, right? That
Mhm.
cultural repair. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I mean, I think that it's exactly what you said, right? Just like us starting to do it for ourselves. I think that the way that we take back, whether it's anthropology or other areas of study, is that we have to first understand what those areas and constructs are, with Black people being the center of the analysis, and then us valuing the work of ourselves. Sometimes I think that these fields, when we look outside and say, well, other people are doing it, is because when other people do it, we're like, oh, that's so interesting. Oh, what are they doing? Or, oh, let me buy a ticket, right? And it's like, well, are we supporting our own people that are doing the exact same thing in the same ways? So just valuing, even if it is someone who might only be, taping it on their phone and doesn't have the same access to the same media or equipment that someone from outside might have. Just beginning to value what we are doing, right? And know that also anthropology is not just the study from the academia, but the anthropology is the story that your Grammy used to tell about a Nancy that you can tell to your kids,
Yeah,
right? That it is the way that we live our culture and practice our culture within
yeah.
ourselves.
I'm seeing a lot more movement especially within Jamaica, right? Within the artistic space, where people are definitely going out of their way to bring to life through various new forms of medium, animation, through
Mm-hmm.
poetry, song and dance, through fashion, right? There's some wicked fashion artists in Jamaica who are leaning into this cultural heritage and doing awesome stuff. So I definitely agree and see the need. And I would say tap into where it does exist, because like we said before, in terms of this solidarity, like it's going to require us to support our own instead of throwing each other under the bus, and crab in a barrel mentality needs to go, because there's space for all of us to win at the end of the day. So I see it as a creative myself. Someone asks, Irie, how can I bring this conversation to people in London? Yeah, that's a great question. How can you bring this conversation to people in London? I don't know if I have a direct answer for that, but I know that in London there are awesome diaspora communities. There are spaces where Caribbean people gather and they share food, and they play the music and then have the cook up outside on, right, or inside, I guess it's cold now. But I would encourage you to tap into these diaspora spaces as a potential first step. And it might honestly require you to be the voice that brings it up, and letting them know that this movement is taking place and that they can support, particularly because being based in London means that they have a line to their local constituents or representatives, those in power, who are ultimately the ones that need to engage in this conversation of repair. So I think definitely use your position within these spaces in London to advocate for repair, even to your MPs and your MEPs if you're in other spaces in Europe, because they're the ones that need to be a part of this conversation as well eventually. I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but feel free to add on anything there.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely the way to go. I know, I know individuals in the UK that are doing this work, right? I to say like their organizations, I can't think of them off the top of my head right now, to give you, but I know that there are people that are doing reparations work in the UK. So
Absolutely.
you might, and some of them I think are connected to the repair campaign.
Send us a message and we'll connect you to some folks that we have. Like you said, I wouldn't be able to list them off the top of my head, but we can certainly connect, if you're interested in being sort of a repair advocate on that side of the pond.
Mm-hmm.
This has been, Niambi, this has been a scintillating conversation, to say the least. I feel very inspired hearing you talk about the conversation on agency, the conversation on repair and healing, and what that means, connecting our ancestral agency with our present day agency, honoring them in doing so, and then charting the course forward. I think there's a very Sankofa imagery built in there, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which is central to this idea of repair to begin with. I want to thank everybody who has joined the live here. As we wrap up shortly, I can't believe an hour and 10 minutes has flown by so fast. That's what happens when we are in good company. But I just want to remind everybody who has joined that this is one conversation in a series of conversations which continues tomorrow. So join us again here Instagram Live at 12 noon, that's Jamaica time, 5 p.m. if you're in the UK, or 1 p.m. if you're Eastern Caribbean time, or Eastern United States. And again in the evening at 6 p.m. Jamaica time for a conversation with Fiona Compton from Know Your Caribbean around practical ways you can honor your ancestors, and connecting that to this conversation of repair. We see Master Herbalist is saying, I would like to become a repair advocate because I'm such amazing to our ancestors. Absolutely. That's the exact response that we want to elicit here. So after you sign in solidarity, you can be a part of our newsletter as well. Send us a DM, let's connect. And for anyone else who is tuned in and has been listening, this is an opportunity for you to honor your ancestral legacy, whether you're from the Caribbean or not, right? What does it mean for you wherever you are to honor your ancestors? And be a part and stand in solidarity, even if you're not from the Caribbean, right? That's the beauty of this word solidarity, that we can stand in solidarity as allies, people who see the atrocities committed, see the need for justice, and say they want to do something about it. Here's your opportunity. Niambi, is there anything that you'd like to add as we close?
Just let's have a great UN remembrance for the victors of trafficked Africans Day. And do something to be free, right? Do something to be free. Do something to be free tomorrow.
Do something to be free and exert your agency.
Absolutely.
I love that title. Let's send that to the Committee for Elimination of Racial Discrimination and see if they can have it changed for 2026.
Yeah.
The victors of the transatlantic trafficking. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Amazing. Spectacular. Niambi, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. You're doing amazing work, and I'm excited to see what the Bahamas Reparations Committee continues to accomplish under your chairwomanship and under your leadership.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me. I'm glad we were able to have this conversation.
Likewise, and thank everybody in the comments. Stay tuned for lots more, and remember to comment, repair, and sign in solidarity. Thank you guys, and have a great rest of your evening.
Bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Rashida, you joined at the last second. We'll be posting the replay, though, so stay tuned to YouTube and catch the full conversation. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much.